In this video, we're going to transform this grayscale drawing into this. Let's go. All right, before we get into the actual technique and process of coloring this grayscale illustration, I first want to talk about sort of the benefits of doing this approach. As I was going through experimenting with different coloring styles, in my last video, I went over a coloring style used by manga artists and comic book artists, and I'm trying to figure out a style that really sped up the process. I found that this particular technique and this particular method I really enjoyed, and for one simple reason, and that is it separated and isolated the different steps or different aspects of coloring something into smaller size chunks that really let my brain really absorb and handle everything. But typically when you do digital painting, you kind of have to do everything all at once. You have to understand your tonal values, you have to understand your color theory, you have to understand like the bounce lighting and all that sort of stuff all at the same time. And that can be really, really difficult to try to manage at the same time, especially in my particular case where I feel just not really confident about my grasp on color theory. So this method I really, really appreciate, because first and foremost what it does is it forces you just to focus on your tonal values. And that's what you see here with the grayscale layer. Here I have my illustration already painted out completely in grayscale. And what that means is that I'm only focused on the shapes, the forms, the tonal value, just making sure there's enough contrast in my darkest darks to my lightest lights, that the shading isn't washed out in any way, that I had to have some hard lines, some soft lines, some plenty of contrast across the board. And I can do that without getting too worried about color selection or how to make my colors work together or any of that sort of stuff. I'm just focused on the tonal value, which is great. It allows me to get through that aspect of the painting really, really quickly. So once I have this, the next step is to set up your document properly. So here I'm just going to open up my layer panel and I'm going to show you exactly how it's set up. So I have my line art layer set up here. I have a flat color that I've put in for the background, and that's only just so I'm not working against stark white. I find that if I have like a gray background or a colored background, I can spot like mist areas that I've colored, or it doesn't influence my colors as much. And then I have my grayscale layer, and then I have my flats layer. Now you would think for this particular coloring method you wouldn't need a flat layer, and you could get away with not doing a flats layer. However, I find it super handy to have it for two reasons. One, you get to point out your colors a little bit. You can understand what sort of range that you're working on with your colors in terms of your skin tones or costume colors or anything like that. And secondly, it helps with the selection and isolating different aspects of your illustration, so that when you do apply the colorization to your grayscale, it's that much more easier. Now, the way most people, or the way that I started out using to color my grayscales, is that I would set my layer on top of my grayscale layer to a color mode, and so it would look like something like this. And yeah, it would inherit some of the shading that I had from my grayscale mode, but it kind of sucked. It kind of looked terrible, and what I would end up having to do is like flatten it, merge it with the layers below, use some tonal curves to mess around with the colors, and then ended up having to paint a lot on top of it anyway. And it really wasn't that much of a time saver, and it really seemed like a really good technique. So let me bring this back to normal. The better way of doing it is to use your gradient maps, and I'll demonstrate how that's done. So first we're going to grab our magic wand tool. We're going to go into settings here and just make sure the apply to connected pixels option is turned off, because we want to be able to select every aspect of like the reds or the skin tones. So we're going to go ahead and select the reds from the costume, and then I'm just going to turn off my flats layer and make sure I'm above my grayscale layer. I'm going to go to the layer, new correction layer, and gradient map. Now the gradient map tool is going to be present in Procreate and in Photoshop. They just might be labeled or placed in different spots, but they'll all be called gradient maps. So once you have it, essentially what a gradient map does is that it maps a gradient color to the tonal values of the layer underneath it. So in this case, it's mapping this black to the darkest blacks of the grayscale below, and the whites to the lightest areas of the grayscale. In other words, if I were to apply some of these preset colors here, like this somber red, it's going to take the darkest reds and apply that to the darker values of the grayscale. It's going to take the yellows and the whites and apply that to the lighter values of the grayscale. So this does already a better job of colorizing the grayscale than just simply switching your blending mode of a layer above it to color. Now, what's great about this method is that you can adjust these in any which way that you want. So first of all, I don't want like the pure white as my highlight, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove that from the grayscale. I like this yellow, so I'm just going to move that all the way up to the right, so the whites are going to inherit that color. This mid-tone I'm not crazy about. It's just a little too subdued for me, so I'm just going to double click on that. I'm going to select a color that's just a bit more saturated. And then you can see automatically those colors just are popping just a lot more. I'm not feeling this gray that they have set to the darkest dark. Instead, I want to maybe play around, add some color variation in here. Maybe put in like maybe a dark purple there. I want to remove this transition here. So you can see just with those adjustments, I have incredible control over how the gradient is being mapped to my grayscale tone. And I'm able to get this rich color scheme applied to the grayscale, which is great. And we did that really, really quickly. So we're going to go ahead, go back to flats layer. Going to select the skin tones and hide my flat layer, new correction layer, gradient map.
Yeah.
And then what I like to do is I like to start with the midtones. So I'm going to go ahead and select this midtone for the skin. And then for the darkest dark, I'll go ahead and select something that's darker but a little bit more saturated. And then for lightest light, I don't like using the bright whites so much. I want to add a little bit of a soft yellow to that. Let's go a little lighter. Then you can just play around with the placement of your colors and the scale so that you can see how they affect the different colors. So if you want to add some more red or some warmth in there, you can. If you feel like you need to add some more brightness to the skin tone, you can definitely do that just by adjusting the scale of where everything lands. Click OK. And this is great. So then we're just going to do it one more time for the hair tones that I have selected here. Turn off the flats, layer, new correction layer, gradient map. And then again, we'll start with the mid-tone. We're going to use like a brown or dark brown that's slightly desaturated. And for the lights, I'm going to go with like a lighter yellow maybe. And for the darkest dark, go to a really desaturated brown. That's looking good. Okay, now this already already is fantastic. It looks great. It's so much better than if we were just to apply the flats on top of the grayscale. However, we don't have to just stop here. We can improve this by doing some overpainting on top of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new layer above our gradient map. And basically what I want to do here is I just want to add some blush over the character's cheeks, on her lips. Use the airbrush tool. Just colorize that a little bit. Maybe I want to add it to the knees. That's a blush there. And then we can sort of clean up the lines that go out after the fact. So right now we're just going to quickly just sort of brush that in just for demonstration purposes. Okay, awesome. We can paint in the lips, the eyes as we like. We can also create a new layer on top of this. We just change this to an add glow layer. I believe in Photoshop this is a linear glow or linear dodge in Photoshop. And we're going to pick like a orangey, so warm orangey color. You'll set our airbrush tool, and I'm just gonna brush in some glows into the illustration just to make it pop a little bit more, where there should maybe brighten the face a little bit. Put it on the shoulders, on the biceps. Just make sure it pops a little bit, and then what you can do is you can lower the, bring down your brush sizes to make the highlights like even pop more in any particular spot you need it to. Sort of reinforce the lightings that you've already put in place. Then again, you can use the eraser transparency or the transparent color swatch, switch back and forth between that. You can sort of sculpt and shape the highlights that you sort of put down. Okay, so that's looking pretty solid. And then one other thing you can do is you can use like a lighter yellow, almost a white, grab your pen tool, create a layer above your line art, and you can add some specular highlights. So we can add some highlights to the cheeks, to the lips, to the eyes. And because we're working above the ink layer, we can apply it above like our hair if we wanted to. You just keep working that in. Just make sure everything fits within the lighting scheme that you set up. And then lastly, what you would do is colorize the lines just to bring everything together. You can leave it black if that's the look that you're looking for. But I like to apply some colors to the line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer above my line art layer. I'm going to set it to clip to layer below. And this is going to allow us to colorize those lines with a brush tool without worrying about it looking too messy. So we're going to use the eyedropper tool. We're going to click the darkest darks for the area that we're going to want to create the line art for. Go a little bit darker than what we already have there for the shading. Grab our brush tool and sort of just brush that in for those areas. You can see that's creating a nice effect with the line art, making it look a little bit less like outlines and more like part of the illustration, which is a neat trick, neat effect to apply to your illustrations. And we would apply that to the rest of the illustration. And here's the final illustration. I really enjoyed this method. I like the fact that you can isolate each step of the process so you can figure out your tonal values first and then figure out your colors later, which is great. And I also like that you can always adjust the colors far after the fact. So if I want to go in a completely different direction, I can, which is great. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If there's some questions you have about this particular process, or if you have your own tips and techniques that you want to share, leave a comment in the comment section below. If you guys like this video, hit that like button. If you want to see more, hit that sub button. And as always, until next time, keep drawing.